I ended up starting my own self-harm in middle school. And I am so scared that anytime anybody's mad at me or my kids are mad at me, the first thing they're going to do is take their lives. There are a million therapists out there. And people might say, I tried therapy, it didn't work for me. It's hard because it takes time. And when you're in crisis, you want to be saved right then. You will get there. Just advocate for yourself or have the right people advocating. Through healing, we often say just waking up and showing up is good enough for that day. But are we giving that same grace to some of these kids where we don't know what's happening at home? So if they come to school and they're dysregulated, why should they have any less expectations than what if the hardest thing they did that day was wake up and make it to school? The frontal lobes aren't fully developed till 25. So something that happens to a kid in high school, that's their life. This is their whole life right now. It wasn't necessarily the fact of wanting to be dead. It was wanting the pain that you were feeling to be over. You just couldn't handle feeling like that anymore. Even if it's been a short period of time that you've battled depression, when you're in it, it is so consuming. It's so hard to see that there is a little light out there that you can come out of.
An exploration of trauma, transformation, and triumph. Your healing starts here. And we are back with another episode of Through the Trauma Podcast. I am Amber, your host, and today I have a guest who is a mental health liaison. She is passionate about helping the youth navigate through mental health. She has quite the story of her own that has led her into this, and we were chatting a little bit beforehand. I just love her passion and her zeal for this, so help me welcome Jillian Harris. Hi, Jillian. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me and for having this platform, allowing people to share their stories as well.
Well, it is a passion of mine as well. I think mental health is so important. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times it doesn't get the attention that it deserves. So I think that talking about it helps destigmatize it a little bit and makes it a little more okay for people to talk about.
So I'll start just telling you a little bit about myself and what got me here. I was raised in a very traumatic childhood. My father was a heroin addict and an alcoholic. My parents divorced whenever I was young, and then he remarried my stepmother, who was very much abusive, just directed toward me, not directed toward my older brother. They took in a lot of foster children over the years, and they would have me stay in the basement with them while my brother had his own suite room, everything upstairs. There was a lot of psychological abuse. Her just really trying to minimize any feelings I had, telling me I'm worthless. Nobody in the family cared about me. A lot of things like that. A lot of times they would lock themselves in their bedroom for the entire weekend and I wouldn't see them. And when you're small, I didn't get what was going on. It was just oh, I'm at my dad's house, not really seeing him. You don't know what's normal, what's not, what to speak out against. So many layers of that. Just, I didn't realize until I was older how his wounds bled into my upbringing and my adult life and shaped all these aspects to where now I'm this adult trying to heal his wounds that he placed on me, as well as the ones that I then caused onto myself while being a mom to teenagers and trying not to bleed those onto them. So just really trying to focus on that generational cycle and being aware. So I did, I was actually initially a hairstylist for 13 years. And then I left that career to dive deep into becoming trauma informed, becoming an LPC. And from there, working towards my clinical license in that. And I currently work as a mental health liaison for a school district so that I can better help kids and their families get connected to services younger. I know a big part of my life, a lot of these things with my own mental health showed very young. And it could be our generation where our parents were, you don't air your family's dirty laundry, you don't show your emotions, that sort of thing. I completely fell through the cracks. I ended up starting my own self harm in middle school and kept that hidden until adulthood. I just was very hyper aware. I struggled with panic disorder and depression and just really feeling small. A big part to my parents, even though they were divorced, my mom still very much cared for him. So no matter the pain that was brought upon me, it was, well, he's your father and he loves you. You know, you forgive him, but he loves you. And that was such a repeated thing that I took that into the types of men that I would date then. Well, he cheated on you, but he loves you. You know, maybe he put his hands on you, but he loves you. So you forgive him because at the end of the day, if they love you, that's all that matters. So that was a huge part of things that I went through and had to learn to navigate well into adulthood. And like I mentioned, now I'm a mom to two teenage boys, and having dealt with a lot of my own mental health and my dad's mental health, I am so hyper aware of everything they do and what teenagers deal with now. When I first started working with my therapist, I actually told her, I am so scared that anytime anybody's mad at me or my kids are mad at me, the first thing they're going to do is take their lives. You know, I'm going to walk in and I'm going to find my kid dead. And that was because I was worried my entire life for my father. Is he going to overdose? Is somebody going to find him? He had his first suicide attempt when I was 20. He called me in the middle of doing so. That first attempt, he took a few bottles of pills. I'm not sure the amount. And I was at a party with my friends and my phone kept ringing. And we were on good terms at the time. This is the last place I'm going to answer a phone call from this man. You know, he's probably high or drunk, and I'm not trying to deal with this. Well, after like the fifth phone call, he leaves a voicemail. So I check it, and you can barely understand anything he's saying. And he just starts apologizing for the kind of father he was and things that he has put us through and, you know, saying his goodbyes. So I hung up and I called my brother and he's like, I got the same message too. So from there, I called my mom. I was in no shape to drive. And my mom and my stepdad at the time called 911 and they made it there in time. And he was in the hospital for the 78 hours that they keep you. And I think when you're somebody like him that has worked the system their whole life, and when you are an addict, you're so confident in your lies that you know exactly what to say to the people to get you out of that situation. So then he was back home, same cycle. Right after that first attempt, I kind of ran away to California. And I was out there for about 3 years where I found myself in a little bit of trouble and I moved home. And a couple days after I moved home, I found out that he was in a psych ward after his second attempt. So that was probably about 4.5 years in between first and second attempts. And this time he had ended up cutting himself from about his chest all the way down. So completely tried to cut his body open. And I am very limited on the details as to if he called, if somebody called, if somebody knew, was worried. By the time I found out, he was healed enough to be in the psych ward. And while he was there, he underwent electric shock therapy. I strongly feel like a big part of him was completely gone. He was never really the same after that. And then after that attempt, him and my stepmom officially separated. And it was about another 4 years after that. So I was about 29. And I received a phone call after a long day of work. Again, I was not one to answer my phone. So it was like not answering this number. I don't know, not answering. And then I had a voicemail, and it was from one of my previous foster sisters saying, you need to go get a hold of your brother. There's been an emergency. And I knew. I think anytime you love somebody that battles mental health or addiction, you are always on edge. You mentally are preparing for the worst, hoping for the best. And you also battle those complex emotions of loving somebody and being so angry at the same time and not quite being able to balance that. And, I feel like I grieved my dad the whole time he was alive and what I wasn't able to ever receive from him and from all the pain he inflicted on me, but it doesn't match the grief of when they finally pass. So I left the restaurant and I called my mom and she's just screaming and he had gotten a gun. We're still not sure how or anything about that. He was never violent in any of his addictions, never angry, never mean. He took it out on himself only. But he had set himself up to be found by one of my previous foster sisters, and he had taken his life that night. And then the next day, he was found. And we didn't find out till maybe a full day after, by the time my brother and I were contacted. And that was the first time I'd even dealt with death. I had had my grandparents, I'd had my great grandparents still at the time. So nobody had dealt with death. And it was just my brother and I kind of set to take that on. I had an almost 1 year old and a 2 year old at the time battling my own extreme postpartum depression. And I had never really been honest with anybody about my life, what I went through, or his struggles. Mainly, I wanted to protect him. It's like I can talk all the horrible things about him that I want, but you're not allowed to because you're not the daughter. You didn't go through it. I still wanted to protect his image in a sense. And growing up, if anybody knew that I was the daughter of somebody that struggled with addiction and mental illness, would their parents let them come play with me? Would they look at me differently? Like, what is she the product of? And that stayed with me. It was almost like I felt like, look at what I'm the product of. My parents, my dad had his GED and my mom kind of graduated from high school from an experimental school and neither went to college. He was an addict. She's trying to figure out life. Nobody expected much of us. So I kind of put that, like, carried that. And I fell heavily into drinking and numbing myself and just got to where I was in such a deep depression. And about 3 some years ago, I got really bad into self harming myself again.
How old were you at this point?
I was, shoot, 38. I'm 42 now. I mean, this has all stayed with me. And, I'm slowly talking about it. I've seen a therapist here or there. I never felt like they were really helping me in the ways or hearing me in the ways that I needed to be heard. And I was a mom. I didn't want to look weak. I didn't want to look weak to my children. So I just started inflicting the pain on myself as a release. And it got so bad that I did have a friend that was very concerned. And I did go into a mental hospital. I only lasted about 24 hours. And this is going to be very controversial, but a lot of times those places can make it worse. Can they help save a life at the time? Yes. But it is very overwhelming in there. And I was with 3 grown men who were in active detox. So it was just very triggering for me. My anxiety was skyrocketed. It was just too much overwhelm. And so they did go ahead and let me go home the next day. But I did the best thing that came from it is I skipped over a very long wait list for a psychiatrist. I got into one and started being properly medicated for the first time. And I became very attached to him. I kept begging him, just be my therapist. Like, I finally feel safe with you. You're a good person. I'm telling you the truth for the first time. And he's like, no, you need a therapist. You need a therapist. And I did eventually find one who I am still with to this day weekly. I see her every single week and still slowly learning how to overcome these things that shaped every aspect of my life, from what I think of myself to how I react to how I parent. There's just so much that I didn't know was being triggered by previous things. So my life has traumatically changed over that course.
Do you contribute that to finding the right therapist and being in this particular therapy?
And there are a million therapists out there. And I know that some people might say, I tried therapy, it didn't work for me. And I just want to beg them to try them. Look at it like a hairstylist. And I say this because I was a hairstylist previously. You might go to one and you're like, did not look good as a blonde by her. But then you go to somebody that does it right and you're like, this is it. This hits. And that's what it's like when you find the right therapist. And it's the same thing with the proper medication balance. It's hard because it takes time. And when you're in crisis, you want to be saved right then. That's where the support system comes in. You just need those right people to hold your hand and sit with you in that, but you will get there. Just advocate for yourself or have the right people advocating.
Now, this therapy that you did, was this talk therapy? Or you're doing it currently? This
Yes.
is talk therapy.
So it's DBT. So she really dives deep into identifying the emotions. We do a lot of sand tray work. And I'm not going to lie, I talk a lot of shit on every time she brings out the sand tray. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to do this again. And every time my subconscious is like yelling at me, like, listen, you clearly need to be focusing on this. And she pushes me. I'm not going to lie, there had been times I wanted to like rage text her after because I was fired up. But if you also don't have a therapist that's testing you once you build that rapport, they need to meet you where you're at and kind of see where you're at. And then that also shows how your reactions change over time when you're healing. I still have a very hard time identifying my emotions. I'll be like, I don't know how that makes me feel, or I don't know if I feel joy or if I feel satisfied. And that's just lifelong numbing. So it takes a lot of work. And I think that's why a lot of people give up and don't stick with it.
Do you think everybody needs therapy?
Yes,
I do too.
100%.
I do too. I know we were talking a little bit about their therapy being stigmatized and there being a stigma behind it. My hope is that through talking more about it, that we'll get more out there where people can, it's not looked frowned upon. Because if we're honest, every person has some type of trauma.
Yes.
Every person has been through trials and tribulations and hardship and all these things. And it's nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, our shame keeps us from healing a lot of times. And that breaks my heart that people hide behind shame and then sometimes hide behind the fact that they don't want to dig back in that wound. I feel like that's a big reason people don't do it sometimes. They don't want to revisit those traumatic things. But the healing on the other side of it is so beautiful if you can do the healing. And it's layers. I'm curious your thoughts because obviously you have quite a story that has many layers to it. As you're going through it, I'm hearing layer upon layer built on it. And I love your transparency. I love your authenticity because you're very honest in saying that, I went through this. I grew up. I kind of, was living my life. And then I started doing this again, like the self-harm again. And I wish people would be a little more forthright, if not publicly, because we have to be wise where we share certain things. Are we ready to share certain things around certain people or certain platforms or whatever? We have to be wise and use discernment in that. But are we being honest with ourselves? And I have to ask myself that sometimes. Because as human nature, sometimes we don't, it's easier not to be honest. It's easier to tell ourselves lies.
Sure. Or ignore it or downplay it. It wasn't a big deal. I did that forever. I'm like, yeah, my dad was an addict, but, he didn't beat me. Or, I'd always chalk it up to it wasn't as bad as like other people had it. And that sort of thing. So then when I got older, I was like, it's fine. Like, that's all I ever knew. Well, no, it's not fine because then it started showing up in motherhood and in my marriage in ways I didn't know. So, did I want to revisit that pain? Hell no. But what it does is teaches you how to acknowledge that pain and not react the same way. I'm not broken every single time. Like, each time I revisit it and I'm honest about it, I feel like it gets a little bit easier. And each time I speak on a podcast or I even meet somebody new where I'm sharing my story, I feel more confident sharing just a little bit more and being more honest because I've been able to see how many people it helps. Sometimes you just need to hear that you're not alone in it. And cognitively, that other people have been through the same things, but it's different to sit across from somebody and have them just be vulnerable with you and honest that way for you to really not feel alone in it.
It's so true. It's so true. And I think that's the hardest thing for people is because when we are in a state of depression, well, I can't even speak and say we. I can speak for me. When I've been in states of depression or hopelessness or those areas of life, it feels very much like I'm the only one going through this. Like, I feel this way. Why is everyone else living their life? Everyone else is happy. Everyone else is going through the motions and doing the things and seems like they're thriving. Why am I struggling through this? And I think that that is something that it's easy to ask, why me? And I'm into self growth and mindset and all these things. And it's like, we have to take accountability. Like, don't fall into the victim mentality. Don't ask why me, take accountability for everything. But when you're in a state of depression or mental health, that's not the time to really be like hard on yourself. Sometimes you can't get out of that racing thought
It's
of
paralyzing.
it's paralyzing. That's a perfect way to put it.
Yes.
So how do we how obviously you're here sharing your story, but how do we reach people? I guess because I'm curious. I mean, we try to do our best, as especially if we've been through things, to help walk other people through it. But what are your thoughts and ideas? Do you have something else that you would recommend beyond sharing your story?
I'm kind of learning that along the way. I just knew that whenever I really committed to my sobriety and my healing, that one, I was going to be honest, and two, I was going to work my hardest so that I could be there and other people didn't feel alone. So then I start talking with podcasts. I run a social media platform where I'm every day trying to put out information to educate people on mental health and really put it into perspective that they can understand. I went to San Diego and I visited a girlfriend of mine a few months ago, and she's my age, we're in our 40s, and she was saying that she experienced anxiety for the first time. And I tell you, my jaw was on the floor. I'm like, I started having panic attacks at like 4. What are you talking about? You have never experienced anxiety. She's like, yeah, I just think I had too much coffee. Gotta be shitting me. Like, this is incredible. People actually don't feel like this. And there are those people. And I think those are the people that it's most because when you don't understand, you don't have anything to connect it to. So I'm just sharing my experiences with her and trying to, so not even connect people that feel it, but really try to help make it understandable to people that are so separated for it. Because who's to say that one day she doesn't have a child that starts battling this and she doesn't have nowhere to start? It's like teaching that layer of empathy too. When people start to talk to you, how are you reacting when they share what they're experiencing? I say this a lot to parents that how you react when your children are telling you things about their friends. Maybe their friends tried drugs or maybe their friends did this. And if you're reacting in an uncomfortable way, that's setting the tone for if they are going to feel comfortable coming to you in the future. And that has to do with, let's say they have ideations or they have struggles. It's just so important. And like I've said, I think our generation is fighting against it so much because we are raised differently to just be more cautious of humanity and curiosity, true curiosity, not in a gossipy way, but curiosity that we all have these layers and to carry them gently and to lead with empathy.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I was thinking as you were talking, when I think of myself, it's easy to go so far in one direction, right? So, because I hated the way that I used to take the victim role, like, oh, this is, woe is me kind of that role, that now I'm like completely on this side where I'm like, no victim mentality. I don't want to hear it. If you have victim mentality, I don't want to be, I can't tolerate that kind of bad energy. So I love what you're saying because it's making me think, well, there is a fine line and there is a place where you have to meet people. And sometimes that tough love is needed. Sometimes it's that empathy is needed more, but we have to decipher and have discernment among the two, I feel like.
Yeah, so deciding because you always want to meet the person where they're at. So are they at this fragile mode where they really aren't able to take that next step? Or are they comfortable holding on to where they are and they need that push to keep going? I used to very much want to say, I'm so tired of people being like, this is just who I am. And, well, I had a bad life. And I'd get so frustrated and be like, you know what? I had a pretty shitty childhood too. And I have never once been mean to say, I've never wanted to react badly. And I've really had to rewind and ate crow on that because that's not true. I mean, I feel fortunate enough that I had a friend recognize what a bad place I was in and help me get to that next step. And not everybody has.
Thank God for those friends, right? It leads us in the right direction.
That's
But
it.
it is true, and I mean, I do feel like there's definitely a spirit of empathy because I run this podcast, I hear lots of stories, I have lots of empathy for that. So I think just deciding and choosing, like, what and again, judging each situation individually, what does this person actually need from me? Because you can't kick someone when they're already down, you have to be careful, and I think this is good that we're having this conversation because so many times we see things from our own perspective and perception. So when someone else is struggling through something, it's like we see it only through our lens. And it's just a very important thing to remember. Hey, let's take a step back and try to see things from their lens. I often talk about this where people, this whole idea of judgment. It's like I can judge right and wrong, but to tell someone you're right or you're wrong, that's a touchy subject. And why is that? It's because I don't know what that person's went through. I don't know what type of childhood trauma they've been through. I don't know if they're in an abusive situation right now. I don't know what's going on in their life. Probably. I mean, some situations you do, but really, who knows? Because people hide things. So you don't really know. And we can look at one of the worst people. You have a picture in your mind of like one of the worst criminals that you think of. What did that person endure? And I'm not saying that gives them an excuse to treat, like you said, to treat people poorly, but how do I know? This is a question I'd ask myself. How do I know how I would respond if I had walked in your shoes? We don't know that. So the only thing we can do is have empathy and at least try to understand where someone's coming through. And at the end of the day, love them through it. Be there, be a support, and love them.
I do find myself in the middle a lot. I really like to sit down and explain to each side what each person is experiencing. I can almost always understand whether I agree with it or not, why, like you said, someone chose to go one way or another. And, big thing, like just to like shift it back into youth and them going through this through healing, we often say just waking up and showing up is good enough for that day. If all you did today was wake up, like you did it, congratulations. But are we giving that same grace to some of these kids where we don't know what's happening at home? So if they come to school and they're dysregulated and they're being seen as disruptive and XYZ, well, why should they have any less expectations than what if the hardest thing they did that day was wake up and make it to school? And so just really trying to help teach that trauma narrative and background and making sure that I'm helping keep an eye out for any of those kids that may slip through the cracks, or if I need to advocate and explain their side to somebody else to help them better understand why behaviors are showing like they are, and or instead of looking at it as attention seeking, these kids are connection seeking. Do they have connections outside of home? Are they just looking for a safe person and they don't know how to ask? And there's just such a broader lens that I think if we were to sit back and not be so, to all the things in the world right now, everybody's just so heightened. And it is hard to take a step back, but especially with our youth taking this on. There just needs to be a lot more grace and awareness and the same expectations that we're putting on ourselves to survive in a time like this. They deserve that grace plus 10 times more.
How long have you been in this position with the youth?
Only in this position for about a year and a half.
So out of that year and a half, have you seen, does it seem like this is a trend that's like trending upward as far as mental health in youth? I know that we have a lot of things going on in our world and our culture. Social media plays a big part in things, and social media was a thing a year and a half ago, but it's getting more. I feel like it's just continuing.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. I think too, with the more we are having these conversations like you're having, the more awareness we can bring, the more people are willing to acknowledge that it is a thing. Before, there was a lot of talk about it with adults And now we're really honing in, you can start to see mental health issues young, very young. And it's that preventative and stepping in and recognizing and educating. It could be even small things like I had a kid who was like, I don't need a therapist. I have family. Why would I ever need to talk to a therapist? And just gently saying, you know what? Don't tell the therapist whatever you don't want to. You don't have to respond. Look at it as your friend. Sometimes you don't want your family to know everything, and maybe you'll tell your friends something. Get to know them, that sort of thing, and just kind of help them rework their thoughts, not to convince them, but I really want all these kids to feel like they have a safe place to be honest because it
Yeah.
can be scary.
Yeah. And it's really sad because you look at the kids that have homes and parents that are like active and a part of their lives and things. And they have parents that just don't know. They just don't know what's going on with their kids. And it's not a fault of the parents. Sometimes kids are great at keeping things. But then you have kids that are like on the opposite end of that spectrum where parents really are just negligent or they really are experiencing abuse. I talk with so many people on this podcast that have gone through childhood traumas, everything from loss, abuse, betrayal, abandonment, all these things. And if we'd be crazy to think that these things aren't happening and we just don't know it. And kids can't even process that. What's going on in their minds? They got so many other things they're trying to process through. I mean, I'm a mom of an 11 and a 14-year-old. They're trying to figure out themselves. They're trying to navigate through life and school and friendships and hormones. That's a whole
Whole other layers, the hormones.
so to think, which I like to think I provide a very healthy home. I mean, I'm not perfect by any means, but I try to, they go to sleep, we have schedules, we do the thing, they play sports, we do all the things, right? And I think there are kids out there that don't have that. Parents just don't even care. I'm not saying it's not even a judgment on the parents. Sometimes it's generational. Do you have thoughts as far as solutions? And I mean, I know you work in this industry, but I don't know if there is necessarily a solution other than going back to just loving them and giving them a safe space, like you said.
I feel like that's the best thing. I also serve on my local charter's NAMI board, so the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and they offer everything's free. It's a nonprofit. So we really try to reach families who just need that support where their kids are going through something, they're going through something. They offer so many free resources. And I know with them, it's all word of mouth. When you are in a crisis, when your spouse is in a crisis, when your child's in a crisis, and you are in full overwhelm mode, you don't have it in you to even click through your computer to find the support that you need. And then you're overthinking. We just need, the more we can talk about it, the more readily we can have resources just posted and available to where they're already in our minds. Kind of like I was saying, I was explaining to my friend who had never experienced anxiety, having those conversations where like maybe she like her child one day and she can go back to this conversation and have this little peace of mind of knowing the next direction to go by word of mouth, by saying, yes, go to NAMI or go find this therapist for this, that when you are in that overwhelm, it'll just be an easier connect. I don't know. I would love to know. I think about this all the time as I'm really big into like suicide prevention and awareness too of what can we do? And I don't know if there's an answer other than just don't stop talking about it.
Yeah. I have a lady that I follow on Facebook. I don't even know how we became friends, honestly. Has a just a heartbreaking story of her daughter committing suicide, and it breaks my heart. But I have heard that kids, their brains aren't developed enough to process through the finality of suicide, which makes me feel like, well, we can't really hold a kid accountable because they can't really process through that. They don't understand death in the sense that this is final. This is it.
And kids'
So,
brains are so impulsive too.
oh,
So
yeah,
they find something out and they react with an act like suicide. They're not even fully thinking it through. The frontal lobes aren't fully developed till 25. So something that happens to a kid in high school, that's their life. You can tell them all the things of you've all these years ahead of you. They're not seeing past that. this is their whole life right now. And that's hard. That's a really tough place to be in. I started talking with my kids about suicide at a very young age, appropriately, to let them know how my dad passed away. And I just really wanted to open up the conversation of when you are feeling, depressed or you're feeling any sort of way, don't be ashamed to let me know. Like, let's talk about this. And maybe you'll have these thoughts. Another big thing that I see is, especially in youth, but it was something I battled too. It wasn't necessarily the fact of wanting to be dead. It was wanting the pain that you were feeling to be over. You just couldn't handle feeling like that anymore. Even if it's been a short period of time that you've battled depression, when you're in it, it is so consuming. You're so overwhelmed. It's so hard to see that there is a little light out there that you can come out of. And that's a really hard place to sit, especially if you're sitting in it by yourself.
I agree to that. I went through a period in my life where had definitely had suicidal ideations, and I felt hopeless. I felt hopeless. Like my actions had led me to a very dark place in my life, and I just didn't think there was hope. Looking back now, I'm like so glad that I decided not to do that. But it's a moment, like you said, a moment of impulse, a moment of decision. It could have ended right there. And it's sobering to think that. But it also is heartbreaking for someone like myself who knows that thought, that feeling. I've been there. I know what that feels like to then think, I hate that people are suffering through that. I want to ask you a question that I've often wondered about. But do you think that there is an agenda, like a bigger agenda, being pushed on our youth definitely from media that puts these ideations in their minds?
I know that there are a lot of studies that say with the pressures of AI, the pressures of the social media aspect, that you can see if your friends are together without you, if you're being left out, and how that can make you feel and that sort of thing. But as far as like putting it like necessarily in your head, I don't think so. It's the same way, like, I don't feel like openly and regularly talking about it will put that idea in somebody's head. If anything, I feel like it makes them more comfortable opening up about it. So, do they have added pressures and different stressors pushed more in front of their face? Absolutely.
Well, the reason I really ask that, I've often wondered this, but I recently, a few months ago, so semi recently, read about this group that was on TikTok, and they were intentionally trying to get kids to do like evil things. The one story that I did hear, and I actually was listening to this on another podcast, not affiliated with mine at all, but just I like to listen to podcasts myself. And this was one where this group, they were like grooming kids on TikTok, and the dad comes in. They like had video footage of this because I think they were going undercover or something. The dad comes in and sees this where someone's talking to the daughter, and they're trying to get her to cut her hair. And she's crying and she's like, no, no, I don't want to cut my hair. And he's like, cut your hair. And the dad comes in, sees this, but then ends up like taking her computer, but I guess gives it back to her. And I hope I'm telling the story correctly, but anyway, the girl ends up cutting her hair. But they had them do things like this to then try to push them into taking their life, and sometimes pushing them just to take their life. No, it's just it's just heartbreaking to think that there's people like this in the world. And I don't know where that comes from. Well, I definitely have my views on where that comes from. But I guess at the end of the day, how do we even protect our kids? And
You know what?
it's
You figure that out.
as we go.
Yeah, I don't my kids almost 15 and 13 don't have TikTok, and recently I was looking through my older son's texts, and he was removed from this school dodgeball team because his peers said that he was too hard to communicate with because his mom won't let him have TikTok. So like he was being punished because they can't text like normal apparently, or Snapchat or something like that was one of those because they don't have social media, and it's like, damn, I'm doing the best I can to protect him, but they're punished in that sense. as well. It's that I don't know. That's really one of the hard layers of trying to heal myself and then watching them and feeling like guilt and how I handle any one of those situations. You're damned if you
It's
do and you're damned if you don't.
And there is the paradox of being a mom.
Yeah.
We're constantly wondering and second guessing. And I think mom guilt is probably one of the hardest things I've ever dealt with because of that very reason. It's like you try your best to do your best with kids. And then you have these people going back to being on the other side of that judgmental coin where people's like, well, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't be letting them do this. And it's like, I'm doing the best I can. Are you and his father together? Yeah. Well, like as a single mom, I feel like there's a whole nother list of challenges that comes with that. And unfortunately, we live in a world where there is lots of brokenness, not just broken families, brokenness in general, brokenness in childhood trauma, brokenness in schools and friendships. And this age of figuring out who they are, I had no idea. I knew I struggled through it when I was a teenager. I remember feeling like I was struggling through it, but raising another human through it comes with a whole nother set of
I said the other day, I was like, I remember when they were like, you know, 20 months apart running around. People are like, oh, it gets easier. You have boys. It's not like girls where they get all catty. They were lying. It got harder. These teenage years are the hardest things that I have been through ever, like 10 times worse than than my own, trying to help them navigate it. And like I'd shared before, how I really struggle with being hyper aware of everything and then my own fears from my trauma and trying to separate, well, these are my fears. I can't place that upon them. It's consuming.
You're right. You're exactly right. I worry about the same things. I relate to you on so many levels. I worry about the exact same things. I navigate through the exact same things with my teenagers. Well, teenager and preteen, but it's challenging. And I don't know that. I think if anyone were to sit here and say they have all the answers, they're probably not being honest.
They're 100% lying. 100%. They're the people on social media that look perfect.
So if you feel that way, like anyone that's listening to this, you're in good company because here we are. We're just moms trying to figure it out and navigate through it, which it's not funny, but we walk through it one step at a time. We figure it out one step, and parenthood's like that.
And it feels good sharing it with you, and you're saying you can relate, but for myself, I do feel very alone in it if my other mom friends aren't sharing that my kid's struggling or this, they're just worried about sports or they're this and that. I wish that I wasn't carrying so much surrounded by them. My therapist told me, and this is very hard pill to swallow. She was like, at the end of the day, you just have to know that you are loving them. You're doing everything to have them feel safe. And this isn't just with your child, your spouse, or anybody you care about. But if something were to happen or if you were to lose them, essentially she's trying to help me cope with not putting blame on myself for everything. And so I repeatedly affirmations to myself, you show them love. They are never going to doubt that I love them. They are never going to doubt that I try to give them a safe space. And at the end of the day, if that's all I did, I feel like that's more than a lot of kids get. And I just have to hold on to that.
Well, and the positive to that, to piggyback on what you're saying, is that we're thinking about these things now. And I think if you're a parent and you think about things on a regular basis, how can I be a better parent? It's like you're self-correcting yourself. It's like you can look and you can say, okay, I'll be honest. Like this morning, we were on the way to school. My son used a foul language, and I was like, I got angry. I got upset with him. I'm like, I do not appreciate foul language, especially towards me or your sister. Like, I don't appreciate that. I know he uses it with his friends. I don't condone it, but I also I'm not an idiot. I know he's a teenager and they go to school and they talk however. And boys have a whole another set of vocabulary than girls sometimes. Anyway, I did. I lost it. And I come home and I feel horrible. I just went off on him about saying a cuss word. Probably some of that is from my own things that I'm concerned about, my own things that I'm struggling with, in myself, just day to day life. And I felt horrible. But then I had to remind myself, you know what, Amber, you're self correcting. You recognize you made a mistake. You parented in the most not not in the most healthy way. How can I go back and change that? How can I go back and do better next time? How can I make this right? Maybe by just being transparent with my kids, like, hey, I probably shouldn't have overreacted this morning about the cuss word. Is it good to speak that like that? No. But is it good for your mom to lose her temper over, you saying a foul language or whatever? So the positive, I think, is self-correcting, asking yourself, how can I do better next time? If you're asking yourself those questions and you're constantly growing to get better, you're doing the best you can do.
Right. Agreed.
So with that, let me ask you this final question. If you had something to really leave with my audience based on the conversation that we had, which really covered a lot of things from childhood trauma to just being authentic, being transparent, sharing your story to youth, just kind of an overall thought or anything else that you really wanted to leave my audience with, what would that be?
Sure. For those of us that had trauma shape us, to just be confident in knowing that just because something shaped you, it's not going to define who you are forever. It's what you do with that. Try and educate yourself and advocate for those around you. And like we've repeated through this, really leading with love and empathy for yourself first and foremost. Any decisions or anything that you did that you're not proud of, I guarantee you were caused by something that you hadn't healed through yet. And love yourself enough to not give up on your chance at feeling better. It's true when they say you're not going to feel like this forever. And when you're in that moment and you're struggling, it does feel like forever and you don't see a way out. But you don't have to feel like that. You just have to keep trying. Make sure, lean on your support system. Just keep having that open and honest conversation, honestly. And anybody that wants to follow along with me, I'm social media Brave Minds movement. I try to really share a lot of educational things on mental health. I get pretty real and authentic on there, sharing a lot of parts about my story and my past. And anything I post about is typically things that I'm dealing with in real time, just trying to get it out there to connect to others so that we don't feel alone in this struggle.
I love that. I love that. Maybe even in the future, there may be a moms group or something on the horizon, just helping
Yeah.
other moms feel like not alone
Yeah,
because it's a journey for sure.
absolutely.
Jillian, you have been amazing. Thank you so much for just for your transparency and your authenticity and just for sharing so openly. I know that this will resonate with a lot of people and I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. It was so nice chatting with you, and the conversation was very genuine and fluid. And I really hope that that reaches a lot of people.
Yeah, you and I both. Thank you.
Hey there, friend. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time here with us on Through the Trauma podcast. Your presence means more than you know. If this episode has spoke to you or gave you hope or made you feel just a little bit less alone, then I would love it if you would take a second, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who truly needs to hear it. Every share, every comment, every listen, it all helps our message get out and reach those who truly need it the most. Healing happens inside of a community, and together we are breaking the silence and creating space for transformation. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You are not alone.